PwC.
오늘 발표에서는
Today's presentation examines how corporate governance has evolved in mature markets like the US and Europe and provides an objective assessment of the unique characteristics, strengths, and limitations of Korea's ownership structure. Balancing global standards with Korean realities, we explore a long-term governance reform direction that enables founder-led sustainable growth while protecting minority shareholders. We also propose a future-oriented K-governance model for sustainable and advanced Korea with legislative policy and institutional recommendations. I am partner in Samil PwC and the head of the Governance Center, Heo Je-heon. This research was conducted jointly with Hami Hee and Irene Han of Samil PwC Governance Center, Professor Chung Jun-hyuk of Seoul National University School of Law, Professor Lee Min-kyung of Seongshin Women's University, and Attorney Kwon Yong-seok of Lee & Co. Korea's economy has steadily grown over the past 2 decades, except during the 2018 global financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, how has the corporate governance of Korean companies improved? Has it shown a similar pattern of development? Unfortunately, external assessments suggest otherwise. According to the rankings published by the Asian Corporate Governance Association, Korea's corporate governance remains at the bottom tier compared to other countries. In 2014, Korea ranked last among the 12 countries evaluated. Some might say, if the economy grew, does governance ranking matter? But with changing social expectations, past models no longer guarantee continued success. Effective, transparent corporate governance is now essential for sustainable growth and enhanced company value. Before discussing governance, let's first look at the ownership structure of Korean companies. The typical image is that of ownership concentrated conglomerates or chaebol. These groups drove Korea's economic growth in its early government-led development phase. The founder's vision, innovation, philosophy, and leadership formed the basis of their success. In the early economic development stage, when professional managers were scarce, controlling shareholders' insight and bold decisions enabled efficient management and investment, strengthening competitiveness during rapid growth. However, as shown by the Daewoo Group case, excessive control by dominant shareholders without proper checks can place a company in serious crisis. Another type of Korean company is one with dispersed ownership, a model common in Anglo-American markets. In Korea, privatized public enterprises after the 1997 financial crisis are examples. These companies developed highly dispersed ownership structures as the government sold stakes to secure liquidity. Over time, even companies with concentrated ownership, such family-controlled firms are likely to become more dispersed through generational succession. While companies with concentrated ownership still dominate in Korea, it's important to note that ownership is gradually becoming more dispersed, and firms with dispersed ownership are likely to make up a larger share in the near future. Korea's corporate governance reached a major turning point during the financial crisis. As a condition for financial support, the IMF demanded governance reform, leading to the mandatory introduction of outside directors in 1998. The 2015 Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering accounting scandal triggered accounting reforms and efforts to strengthen audit functions. In 2018, the National Pension Service adopted the Stewardship Code, raising expectations for more active institutional investor engagement. And this year, a significant change was made as directors' fiduciary duty was expanded from serving only the company to serving both the company and its shareholders. Corporate governance can be defined in many ways, but at its core, it refers to the principles and systems by which key decisions are made within a company. One might think of a top executives like the CEO or CFO to think about who actually makes the decisions. So all of these may be correct. Corporate governance encompasses the roles, relationships, and distribution of authority among management, shareholders, and the board, and other stakeholders in the decision-making process. Its goal can be summarized in two main objectives. First, to increase corporate value, that is, to grow the pie, and corporate governance must provide a framework that enables the best possible decision-making. It should include policies and procedures for effective appointment and clear principles and systems to support a sound and innovative managerial judgment and appropriate incentive mechanisms. Equally important is distributing the pie fairly. This has gained more attention recently, with legal reforms expanding directors' duties to shareholders and strengthening employee protections. To enable fair distribution, governance must minimize agency costs between major and minority shareholders, ensure transparency through fair disclosure to address information asymmetry, and establish systems for oversight and accountability. The key point here is that distributing the pie fairly also helps to grow the pie. In other words, the two goals are not in conflict. They are mutually reinforcing. If controlling shareholder or management neglect the protection of minority shareholder or creditors, the company may struggle to raise funds or lose growth opportunities. So, protection of shareholders and creditors serves the interest of controlling shareholders and management as well. When comparing the PBR, price-to-book ratio of major countries, including Korea, we find that Korea's ratio is lower than not only those of advanced economies, but also of emerging markets. Korea's PBR is 0.8, and many say is a Korea discount, the persistent undervaluation of Korea, and because of that, the shareholders are now taking action and demanding improvement. So since the Donghak Ant movement or the retail investor movement during the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of individual investors holding Korean stocks has risen sharply. Then, as a result, political and social awareness of corporate governance and minority shareholder protection also increased significantly. Amid this shift, shareholder activism has moved to the forefront. During the same period, activism campaigns targeting Korean firms also grew rapidly. Many of the campaigns are related to governance issues, showing that corporate governance has become a major concern for investors. As mentioned earlier, there's no single right answer to corporate governance, but there are necessary conditions. Think about an airplane. To operate the airplane safely, efficiently, with a clear purpose, we need a skilled pilot and a control tower. Likewise, a company needs capable management to steer operation and a strong board of directors to oversee and guide them like a control tower. The roles of shareholders, boards, and management differ depending on the company. In ownership and concentrated firms where conflicts between controlling and minority shareholders are a key concern, and the three roles are the crucial. So we need the controlling shareholder who can make innovative long-term decisions while supervising the CEO. And the second portion is an independent board. And the third is a minority shareholders who can act as a check. In contrast, in firms with dispersed ownership, where no dominant shareholder directly influences the decisions, resolving the agency problem between shareholders and management is key. So, there is a need for a strong CEO capable of pursuing innovative and long-term strategies. Second, an independent board that delegates business operations to the CEO, and an active market force, a corporate control that evaluates the CEO and board performance objectively. To broaden our perspective, let us look at some overseas cases. Even in foreign companies with controlling shareholders, these shareholders engage in management in various ways. Some take on key executive roles, such as CEO, and participate directly in management, while others stay out of day-to-day operations and instead focus on supervising or monitoring managers. At Berkshire Hathaway, for example, Warren Buffett has implemented a clear plan that separates management successions from wealth succession. This transparent approach to succession has become one of Berkshire Hathaway's core sources of value. And let's look at TSMC's case for the management appointment. Founder Maurice Chung recognized the importance of CEO selection and tested three internal candidates by assigning them distinct leadership roles before finally choosing the most suitable successor. This method reflects a grow the pie approach and could guide Korean firms. So Korean firms are in an environment where the market for professional managers remain limited. A leading example of controlling shareholders' role is the Wallenberg family in Sweden. Members of the Wallenberg family, as controlling shareholders, have long participated in the board and consistently appointed CEOs capable of enhancing long-term corporate value. Applied to Korea, this would resemble a system where a separate committee within the board, such as CEO Nomination Committee, includes a continuous participation by a member of a controlling family in the CEO selection process. To gain the deeper insight, we spoke directly to domestic and international institutional investors and experts. The NPS has already developed a roadmap to promote responsible investment, reflecting the intent of the recent Commercial Act amendment in advance. So we do not expect major structural changes resulting from the amendment. However, as a large minority shareholder, the NPS's casting vote influence is likely to grow even stronger. The reform is expected to reinforce several areas of corporate governance that had long been underemphasized, such as enhancing transparency and the trust in CEO succession policies and the rationalizing executive compensation structures. In addition, we are considering ways to leverage corporate governance as an active driver of investment returns by referring to the Canada CPPIB model.
We have a CEO and other senior executives who are professional managers, then they continue to have a sense of industry evolution, market developments, and fresh ideas that can come up to the board for the board's discussion. And I think that's the key thing. The execution and management needs to be professional, while the board can still be family controlled to maintain the culture. If that works well, then you can have the transition where the second and third generation are mainly controlling the board, but not running the management.
Boards emphasize transparent, merits-based succession planning, and investors support family control with governance and competence. Regulators require disclosure of family ties, and public admires long family firms but remains cautious about nepotism. the U.S. eases estate tax burdens on succession, enforcing board oversight with independent evaluations, and encourages merit-based family leadership to balance legacy and investor confidence, offering a model for Korean founder-led firms. So really, what I would say is that early planning, transparency, and balancing family legacy is and are keys to effective CEO succession and family planning.
As I mentioned, the focus and role of corporate governance differ depending on ownership concentration level. So the presence of a controlling shareholder changes the board's oversight targets, functions, and composition. This means we must not only address the structural issues that arise in firms with controlling shareholders, but also prepare governance systems suited for dispersed ownership structures where management holds substantial decision-making power. To build a desirable model of K-governance, I propose 6 key tasks for us to consider and address. First, we need to redefine the role of controlling shareholders to promote a real separation of ownership and management. In Korea, heavy inheritance taxes are accelerating the dilution of controlling shareholder stakes during succession. It's now essential to create institutional incentives that shift their primary role from direct management to oversight and long-term value preservation. Controlling the families should focus on monitoring professional managers' performance and the fiduciary duty over the long term. Of course, as seen in global cases, some family members may outperform professional managers, so excluding them entirely from executive candidacy would not be desirable. Second, the soft law mechanisms must be strengthened so companies can voluntarily pursue the governance model best suited to them. Until now, regulation in Korea has relied heavily on hard law, where violation often result in the repeated criminal or administrative sanctions. In such environment, government focused on detecting violations, while companies focus only on legal compliance instead of improving corporate culture. Governments and regulators should go beyond their policing role to help shape a sound corporate culture by issuing clear guidelines and providing incentives that encourage voluntary participation in order to introduce more the soft laws. Through the activation of the soft laws, companies can foster a long-term trust-based culture centered on the creation and fair distribution of shareholder value. Ultimately, the goal of soft law is to build an environment where self-regulation by both companies and market participants effectively prevents conflicts of interest and private benefit seeking. So third, CEO succession planning and transparency must be strengthened. Boards should systematically identify, develop, and evaluate CEO candidates based on clear criteria, and such processes must follow independent judgment and transparent procedures. It's important to establish and share succession plans in advance, disclosing the candidate's competence and rationale for participation in management to build a stakeholder trust. Referring to global best practices, the boards should be institutionally required to establish, review, and disclose CEO succession plans to enhance management continuity and market predictability. In particular, when control passes to a family member of the controlling shareholder, companies should disclose detailed information on the candidate's ability, expertise, and leadership to ensure the legitimacy of succession process. Fourth, we must prepare for a future where dispersed ownership companies without controlling shareholders become more common. Korea's legal and institutional framework remain largely built around ownership-concentrated business groups, leaving limited provisions for dispersed ownership firms. Even during listing views, stability of control is a key factor, making it difficult for such firms to go public. Therefore, legal reforms are needed to establish exemplary governance models for companies without controlling shareholders. We have to strengthen internal controls to prevent short-term or self-interested behavior by management, and also it's important to ensure the independence and professionalism of nomination committees to prevent undue external influence in CEO appointments. Finally, as the mandatory cancellation of treasury shares is set to take effect, now is time to consider reasonable takeover defense mechanisms to protect shareholder value. Such mechanisms must be approached with caution, as they can easily be abused to entrench controlling shareholders or weaken market discipline over poor management. While defensive measures that can be used indiscriminately, they should be avoided, protecting core national technologies, preventing capital flight, and safeguarding national security justify serious consideration of appropriate defenses. It's time to begin a social dialogue on the selective introduction, on the strict conditions and the strong safeguards of mechanisms such as poison pills or the dual-class shares. Any new defense mechanism must be designed not to conflict with minority shareholders' interest, and directors' fiduciary duties should be applied more stringently when deciding on such measures. Finally, we need to shift from public enforcement centered on administrative and criminal sanctions to private enforcement focused on civil revenues. In Korea, agencies such as a Fair Trade Commission, National Tax Service, and Prosecutor's Office have played a dominant role in corporate governance enforcement, while shareholder derivative suits and securities class actions remain rare. To promote private enforcement, we should consider litigation incentives and the specialized private enforcement body to represent minority shareholders and reassessment of criminal penalties. These measures would help shift Korea toward a civil liability-based framework. By easing excessive criminal sanctions, we can strengthen private redress mechanisms that compensate minority shareholders for actual losses. The transformation of corporate governance has already begun. We look forward to seeing an advanced corporate governance system help eliminate the Korea discount, usher in KOSPI 5000 era, and drive the continued success of Korean companies. Thank